People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of A First Time for Everything. I like that new snazzy intro that Joe put together. I don't think I had seen that yet. So I want to welcome everybody to another episode. And I just want to remind everybody to send a star to let our hosts and producers know how much you appreciate what we're doing here at Go Indie Now. Every time you contribute, you get entered into our season prize package drawing with gift card swag and more. So yeah, definitely show us some love. We appreciate it. We're talking tonight with Dan Jolley. And it's rare actually that I interview somebody that I've actually met. A lot of times people are all over the world. So Dan and I have crossed paths. We were Facebook friends and then met at, what you say it was HalloCon, right?
It was either HalloCon or FarleyCon, one of those.
I think it was HalloCon because it was definitely like Halloween or horror themed. I remember that. You were up on like a little kind of lift thing.
Oh yeah, the dais.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so that was the first time we actually met face to face. So, but yeah, Dan seems like a nice guy. We'll see as we get into this. But Dan, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Jolley. I am a professional writer. I've been writing for a really, really long time now. I started when I was still in college. I was 19 when I got my first contract. I started out writing comic books, and from there branched out into licensed property novels, and then original novels and children's books. In 2007, I started writing for video games, and I'm still doing all of that stuff. In 2018, I managed to sell a pilot to Nickelodeon, but it got kiboshed. All the executives got swept out, and it got swept out along with them. So I wear a lot of hats. I have fingers in a lot of different pies, I guess you could say. I have keyboard, will travel. You know, I'll write anything.
Yeah, and Dan's not kidding. So we were talking before the show started, and I think we kind of briefly talked on this. So I'm a librarian, and Dan has written for, I don't know if you can see this, here we go, Warriors, and then that's work for hire, or is it shadow writing? What do you call that?
Well, they don't have my name on the cover there because Aaron Hunter is the name that everyone knows, but if you flip it open, it actually it does
as
say
on the
written,
inside.
Yeah, written by.
Yeah. You can see that there, y'all. But yeah, so it shows Dan's name, I think, right there. Yep.
Yeah, Warriors is it's a cooperative effort. It was created by a book packager in London called Working Partners. And so we were just talking about this before the show. Aaron Hunter it's a house name. There are, I think, 4 or maybe 5 now people who write officially under that name. So I've been described as the unofficial Aaron Hunter.
So yeah, as that unofficial Aaron Hunter.
Well, yeah, that's on my business cards.
Yeah.
So yeah, they said, well, what we want to do is a series of graphic novels that are like side stories that like fill in the gaps, answer questions about characters that didn't get answered in the actual novels. And I heard that project was coming up, and I basically like jumped up and down and stamped my feet and held my breath until they let me do it.
How do you hear about something like that?
At the time, the Warriors books were coming out, unless I have my facts really, really wrong here. It's been a long time. They were coming out originally from Tokyo Pop, and HarperCollins was distributing them, publishing them. And I was working for Tokyo Pop at the time. And so the word came through my editor that it was a thing that they were going to try to do. And I was like, hey, I write graphic novels and I like cats. And I like work. I like getting paid to write. And so, I convinced them to let me do it.
That's
And
cool.
I don't even know how many volumes we've done now. I think they're over. I think the side stories are over. They've shifted over into adapting the novels now, and that's a different team.
Okay.
But for quite a while, I was the guy that wrote all the scripts for the Warriors. They call them manga. It depends on how picky you want to get with that definition. You know, a lot of people say manga can only come out of Japan. It's manga size. We'll say that.
Yeah, at the library we just call them comics, but yeah. So, and then we had this at the library too, which is Twisted Journeys: The Time Travel Trap, and your name is on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that and how you got into that.
I think I wrote 9 of those.
Okay.
In the series. I think some large number. Let's see. It was the artist Steve Kurth who introduced me to an editor at Lerner Books. When I was doing comics full time, it was a constant hustle, make new contacts, get new jobs, try to keep, rent paid and food on the plate. And I did a couple of things for Lerner. I also did for them a series called Graphic Myths and Legends, which is like different cultures' folk tales illustrated.
Ooh. And is that for kids or is that like for adults? Okay.
Yeah, that's for kids.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really cool. And then I'm going to show one more thing, and then we'll kind of dive into the other questions. And lastly, Dan also writes adult books, not just for kids.
Yeah.
And so there we go. So this book, The Storm, is out by Falstaff. I actually got this from Dan at that event that we went to, and I'm in the process of reading it, really liking it. I love, what I really loved about it was just your ability to kind of show things that are uncomfortable in a really honest way, but that's also doesn't come across as offensive. So you deal a lot with kind of like the racism in the South and kind of small towns, and you do it in a way that definitely can make you a little like, but it's truthful and it definitely lends to the story. It doesn't seem gratuitous. So I'm only about a third of the way through the book, so don't tell me anything about it, but I'm really enjoying that book a lot.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that book, a lot of it was a lot more. It felt more journalistic than creative. Because
that's why I like it, because that's what I like to read.
A lot of the situations, the dialogue, the people in there are people that they're people that I've met. They don't have the same names, but they're people that I've met, and they're, the things they say are the things that I've heard people say. And it's not great. There's that actually got me started on mystery stuff. Okay. It was inspired by the tornado that hit my hometown in 2011. Okay. And that changed the character of the town really profoundly. Just the way the town, it looks like a different town now. A big chunk of that was because it knocked all the trees over. Yeah. And you can actually see from one end of the town to the other now, because before you couldn't. But that inspired the thought, because I was looking at all these houses that were just reduced to literal rubble fields, and I was thinking, what kind of stuff got picked up and carried away by the tornado? what if your diary got pulled out of your wrecked bedroom and flung into the next county, and then somebody just finds it in their backyard?
Yeah.
And from there, it turned into a murder mystery, because the setup for the book is that the tornado knocks a house off its foundations that everyone thought was abandoned, and reveals a recently used torture dungeon. So then it's up to the 95% white town's first ever black female sheriff, who already is fighting an uphill battle to try to figure out who this predator is that's been dwelling undetected amid the townfolk for who knows how long.
Yeah, it has a lot of layers, which I've really enjoyed. You definitely kind of bring those different stories into it and create, this like whole combination. But what I found it interesting is one of the things I was a journalist before I was a fiction writer. And so I tend to like do a lot of research, and I like to see like nonfiction kind of weaved into fiction. And it does read very much like somebody's account of something that happened, outside of that kind of like maybe supernatural speculative kind of feeling to it, obviously. But it definitely has that like this, you're kind of almost reading a news article, but you're also reading this fiction story. And I find that really intriguing. I also live in North Georgia. So, and I know this takes place in North Georgia. And so are you from North Georgia? You are. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of this is really truthful. And I'm not. I'm originally from New York, and I moved south. And so I definitely have a different perspective than, say, being raised here, where some of what I encountered when I first moved here was shocking, some of the behaviors. And like I said, I really feel like you handled that extremely well, because you didn't hide it or try to sugarcoat it. But you also made it make sense for why you were putting it in the book.
I was born in a little bitty, I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, technically. Okay. That's where the hospital was. But I grew up in a little bitty tiny town called Ringgold.
I know it. Yeah.
Ringgold, Georgia. And I went to high school and the first 2 years of college at a community college here, and then I left. And I didn't think I was ever coming back. And then I came back. Yeah. My life took a turn, and I wound up coming back here. And little biographical information. I reconnected with a girl that I knew from school. Mm-hmm. I had never really talked to her before. We just kind of knew who each other were. And we started talking, and now we've been married for 15 years.
All right. Yeah.
So I live in Ringgold again.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I pass through a lot. I do a lot of events in Chattanooga too, so I pass through Ringgold a lot. And I've actually done a few things in Lafayette. I had to learn. I was told I was pronouncing it wrong when I said Lafayette, so Lafayette, Georgia, which is pretty close to there as well. So there seems to be a lot happening. So here's a question I'd like to ask you, kind of unique to your situation, is when you're writing this and you're trying to write characters like Belvis in this book, do you ever question whether or not you should go like full on how people are, what they say, using derogatory terms? Do you really kind of question whether or not you should, or you should kind of like, space it out or something like that? Or how do you handle those really awkward conversations in the book?
I decided not to pull any punches with the storm. That's why there's the author note in the beginning that it's a warning, like you're going to hear some really awful stuff in this book, but some really awful stuff happens and is talked about in real life around here. And so, I usually do a what I call a family edition for my mom, where I go through and take out all of the cursing and all of the sex. She's okay with the violence.
Yeah, right.
But I gave her the family edition of The Storm, and she really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I wondered how long it was going to take before I got in trouble for it. But yeah, she came to me one day and said, so one of the women in choir with me at church bought your son's book, and I just can't read it. I just can't read it. The language is so terrible. Maybe it's not meant for you.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever, other than that, have you gotten any negative feedback, or people said maybe you shouldn't have done that, or has it been pretty accepted?
Nah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've heard people say things like that was a little bit hard to get through parts of it. That like you said, was a little bit shocking. And a couple of things that were said that like some people didn't realize were ever said out loud by real people in the world now. But nobody's ever like rebuked me because of it.
Yeah, I actually found it really authentic, and though it was hard, kind of a little cringe at times to get through those, I knew that it was authentic to how people really do speak, the things that people say, the kind of sometimes hidden racism, sometimes not so hidden racism. So I actually appreciated that you were willing to not like hide it, because I feel like that shock factor hopefully would help somebody maybe consider the reality of racism and what happens. And so, to maybe open their mind to be a little more compassionate. So yeah, I mean, it was like when I first read it, I went, oh, okay, we're going there. But I did appreciate the authenticity of you writing it that way.
One of the characters is directly based on a real person, and that real person came to me and they enjoyed the book and called out the character that was based on them as being particularly racist.
Oh my gosh.
Never made the connection.
Oh.
I certainly didn't say, oh.
I was like, how would I handle it? I was like, oh yeah, thanks. Appreciate your feedback. Yeah, that would be tough. No, yeah, I really appreciate, like I said, I'm genuinely enjoying the story because I think the way that it's written, I mean, you're right. And I was just saying this actually about your style of writing. I like that you can put in a lot of kind of description and detail without making it seem boring, because that is a skill set a lot of people don't get. They either don't do any detail or they do so much that I'm like, I don't care. Can we just get back to the meat of the story? You really weave everything into the action and the dialogue, and so it continues to move forward. And I think that's a real skill a lot of writers need to learn.
Thank you.
So I just want to point that out. And I do try to always give kind of writing tips when we do these too, because I think that a lot of new writers are like bogged down by just rules, and they kind of don't understand that a lot of it is like learning your voice and how to express your voice in a way that is still yours, but the reader can enjoy. So do you feel like that's been an evolution for you, or do you feel like you write similarly now than you did when you first started?
Well, I've gotten a whole lot better than I was when I was 19.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's supposed to work. The conventional wisdom dictates that the more you do something, the better you get at it. At least that's what's supposed to happen. So I like to think that I'm always improving. So maybe by the time I'm 85, I'll think of myself as a really, really, really good writer.
You think you finally have like gotten to that part? Yeah. Do you feel like your life experience has given you the ability to create more layered stories?
Yeah, definitely. There are things that I've just lived through by virtue of being alive. Common human experiences that I think it was Stephen King that said it was a little bit ghoulish, the way writers sort of cannibalize events of their own lives and events of those lives, of those close to them. But, there's always that one little part in the back of my head that's like, oh yeah, I just left the hospital where something horrible happened, and now I can write about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately we do have experiences, and it does, they say write what you know. Well, sometimes what you know is maybe directly your experience, but sometimes it is maybe an experience that you saw somebody else go through. And it's still an experience. And I think that when you add those layers to a story, they do seem more real, more relatable. Somebody that's maybe going through that can say, oh, wow, they definitely have been through that, because they wrote about it in a way that I understood or I related to.
Yeah. And, it's something to strive for, really, is just putting down on paper the kind of experience that people can relate to. And I have a whole lot of experience writing characters that are nothing like me. I revamped the DC Comics character Firestorm in 2004. It was a funny story. I'll try to go through it quickly. The editor called me up and he said, "Hey, so Firestorm is this character. It's this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy named Ronnie Raymond, and it's an old character, and the existing fan base is not enough to support a new series, but we want to do a new series. So can you give this guy a fresh start?" And that's what they kept emphasizing: fresh, fresh, fresh. And I was like, "How fresh are you talking about?" Like, fresh start. And I said, "Fresh enough that it doesn't have to be the same guy." And the editor, I'm on the phone with him, and he goes, "Ooh, let me call you back." Click. And I imagine him scampering down the hall to his boss's office, and he comes back 10 minutes later and he calls me and says, "Yes, it's a new guy." And I said, "I was waiting for that." And I said, "Okay, does he have to be a white guy?"
Ooh.
And he goes, "Ooh, let me call you back." Click. 10 minutes later, "Yes, the new Firestorm is black." So I wound up writing, the character's name is Jason Rush. And you can see him. You saw a version of him in the TV show Legends of Tomorrow. And then he shows up in video games and, of course, lots of comic books. But there was a lot of backlash at the time, not only because people just didn't want to see Ronnie Raymond go when I had been, like, essentially commanded, get rid of Ronnie Raymond. But they were also like, I was like 36, I don't know, at the time, whatever, 30, 33. And they were like, how's a white guy in his 30s from the South going to write about this 17-year-old black kid from Detroit? And I was like, well, I'm going to make some stuff up. It's the same way that I wrote about a schizophrenic, psychokinetic, undead ex-Nazi guy in my previous series, which was called Obergeist. But even if the character isn't anything like you, we're still all human. I drew on my experiences with my father when I was writing Jason Rush. And, some black guys found me at a con one time and they were like, you're Dan Jolley. You wrote Firestorm. And I was like, yeah, that's me. And they said, dude, this is so real.
Nice.
I thought, yes, I didn't screw it up. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that kind of leads into some questions that, are maybe unique to your experience or your writing, which is, the Storm has one of the main characters, or kind of like your main character. Is it Xandra or Zandra?
Xandra, yeah.
Xandra, and she's, black female police officer, none of which you are. So, writing in that level of diversity can come with criticism, and it can come with maybe like caution as to should we be the voice of people that we aren't. How did you kind of, I guess, deal with that? Did you use sensitivity readers? Did you reach out to people, that fit that mold and ask them to take a look, or how did you handle that?
Yeah. I gave it to a couple of my friends who are black women and took their feedback. Luckily, it wasn't enormous. Most everything in there they said that I got right, and the parts that they said that I got wrong, I listened and I made some adjustments. I also took what they call a Citizens Academy, which is this thing with the local sheriff's office where you go in and it's a 6-week course, and they walk you through every step of every department in the sheriff's office. I wound up actually talking to a black female sheriff, Sheriff Paula Dance in North Carolina, in Greenville, North Carolina. Yes, I do write characters that are not like me. Sometime around 2010, I seem to have lost the ability to write a protagonist that isn't female.
Okay.
And, I'll tell you a story about that. It was back at Tokyo Pop. I pitched them an idea for a comic book series, and they said, we like this, but would you be willing to make the main character a girl instead of a boy? And I was like, oh, I can give it a shot. Sure. We'll see what happens. And to my own surprise, even more than anyone else, it turned out that I was really good at writing female protagonists.
Yeah. And I will back you on that, because I am pretty critical about, reading books where you can tell if a man wrote a female character that he didn't really take time to really delve into, a woman's mind and how our lives are, our experiences. Reading The Storm, I've definitely said, okay, he nailed it. He definitely understood, or did the research to understand, how a woman thinks, how she's going to move through the world around her, and how she's going to perceive her existence with others, and I think you did a really good job with that. And that's a skill, and I think a lot of people don't get that skill.
and it's not one that I tried to cultivate. It just came out that way.
Now, do you come from a very female heavy family, or was this really just kind of random?
I was close with my mom growing up. But it just kind of happened. My wife says my inner child is a 13-year-old girl. And so that project at Tokyo Pop, they couldn't decide on an artist. And I had heard that they were going to start doing a prose line. And I said, would you guys like me to just do this as a novel? And they said, oh, yeah, go ahead, do that. And suddenly I'm a YA author.
Okay.
So yeah, I wrote 3 books for them. It was a trilogy called Alex Unlimited.
Cool.
It was about a girl who could summon alternate reality versions of herself, but they were always cooler than she was. So she was always stuck being her own sidekick.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's interesting because I tend to, I try to write, I always challenge myself to write anything. So right now, write female. I do gravitate more towards male main characters, but I grew up with 5 older brothers and I was the only girl out of 10 grandchildren. So my female experience was pretty minimal. I just didn't have much. And so I always think that I'm somewhere inside, I'm like a 17-year-old boy, because that's how my brain thinks is growing up with my brothers. So it's interesting. That's why I asked if you grew up with females or if this was just kind of an evolution that came naturally to you. And it sounds like
came naturally somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah, maybe in a past life you were, you're a girl.
So about The Storm, I wrote a TV pilot script based on it.
Oh, okay.
I had a manager for a while, and I went out to Hollywood and was pitching ideas to executives. I did what they call what I call it, the couch and water tour, because you go to the executive's office and they have you sit on the couch and wait for 15 minutes, and their assistant brings you a bottle of water. And The Storm was just an idea, and I pitched it, and every single meeting, I had 15 meetings that week. Everyone said, wow, that's a fantastic idea. It's too bad it's not based on a book.
Really?
And I said, wait here. And that was in April. And in November of that year, the book came out. Because I went through, it was a different publisher from Falstaff at the time. I don't know. And then I wrote a pilot script to go along with it. And I guess the script didn't land as well as the book, because there weren't any nibbles. And then there was this pandemic that happened.
Yeah, I would try again, because I would love to see this as either a series, a limited series, or a movie. It's definitely got all the markers for something really, really entertaining. So yeah.
Well, I was at a little show at the Cobb County Library about a year and a half ago. And this woman came up to the table and said, tell me about your books. And so I told her about The Storm, and she said, I'm an actress and I want to play this part. How can I get the rights so we can collaborate and develop this and sell it as a project? And I was completely flat-footed, and I was like, oh, ask nicely.
Yeah.
So yeah, her name is Alexandra Foucard, and she and I have worked together and are almost done with what we're going to be showing to people as the new version of the script. We're modifying it based on the feedback we got, because we entered the Palm Springs International Diversity Initiative screenplay contest.
Nice.
And won.
Yay, that's awesome.
And so, yeah, the guy, we had a meeting with a consultant, and he was like, you don't have to add anything to this. The story is great. The characters are great. Situation pops. It's overwritten. I can tell this was written by a novelist, Dan. So yeah, we're paring it down a little bit, and then we'll see what we can do with it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you have me as a fan. Definitely, I think it'd be great. And I was going to share on the dusty shelves of left socks, as my production team used to say. All right, Joe. So that's really cool. Now, have anything else that you've written, has anything else been adapted into TV or movies?
No. And the pilot that I sold was not based on anything either. Sean DeLoach is a guy that I write with sometimes, and he and I co-wrote a graphic novel for Dark Horse called LARP, with an exclamation point, and it was about LARPers. Yeah. And we wrote a script based on that. And in fact, at the same time that I was talking to people about The Storm, LARP went out. And Nickelodeon came in and said, we don't want to do LARP, but we like what we read and we want to talk to you guys. Okay. So Sean and I went into the Nickelodeon offices, and they said, we have like half of an idea. We want to pitch this to you, and if you guys can go turn it into a whole idea, then we'll see about turning it into something. And Sean and I were like, shit, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the freelancer answer. Yes, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then if you don't know how to do whatever it is, then you go learn how. So they pitched us this idea, and he and I went off and fleshed it out and came back and gave them a pitch in a meeting that was supposed to be 45 minutes and turned into 2.5 hours. And the executives loved it, wanted to do it as a single camera show. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. My voice is weak. It goes out. And like we got the new version. And it wasn't even a new version. It was the pilot script for this new show written. They had assigned a showrunner to it, Anthony Farrell, who is just like this legend among children's television programming. He's doing a ton of work for the BBC and in Canada. And then Nickelodeon's parent company, Viacom, had this big shift around and basically closed the Santa Monica offices. And the new executives came in and said, yeah, we're not doing shows like this.
Bummer.
So yeah, we got swept out along with all the other shows that were in development. That's the key. Getting something made is your executive, whatever executive is attached to it, needs to stay there the whole time.
Yeah, you can't leave.
That also can apply for novels too, because I got hired. I signed a contract and got a very pleasant advance for a property at one of the big mainstream publishers for an awesome children's novel series. It was funny. It was great, and I had the first like 8 chapters or 12 chapters written, and the editor quit. And the new editor came in and didn't read any of the pitch, which explained everything. She just read what was there, and she didn't get it. And that turned into, it was a horrible, horrible situation. The whole project died, and it was close to them demanding the advance back, which would have been tough because that was gone.
That was
I
gone.
spent
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say.
And yeah, I wound up writing an entire new draft of a novel for that editor, to have her say, yeah, this isn't good enough. We're just not going to do it. And at the time, I had turned down video game work that had been offered to me that would have paid substantially more, but I would have needed to travel a good bit for it. And I didn't want to travel if I could help it. So yeah, it's like horror stories sometimes happen.
Yeah, I have my own. I definitely got burned. I kind of talk about this a little bit. I had like 3 different contracts in the time, basically from early 2021 to about the end of 2021. I had 3 contracts that one, the publisher just closed and can't do anything about that. It was during, COVID and they just couldn't keep up. They were pretty new. One, the contract was just sketchy enough that I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. And then one, he just decided to quit paying or communicating or whatever. We got to get the Authors Guild involved and ask for termination of, the contract for breach contract. And so there's a lot of horror stories out there. And I think a lot of writers need to be aware of that. I always recommend Writer Beware for people that are looking, at publishing. She's great about really kind of tracking these publishers and if they've kind of done bad contracts, she'll share about that. So I do say before you sign something, check her site. She'll even usually respond if you email her and say, hey, I got this publisher. This is this. She actually went over that one sketchy contract with me because I said, hey, I got this contract. I said, there's just a clause in here. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I said, can you just, I know you're pretty familiar. And she's like, yeah, don't sign that. So it was like, yeah, I mean, like having that is very helpful, but I don't think people realize how many times writers start something and then kind of get burned in the process. Now, my question is, did you have to pay the advance back and did you keep the rights to all of the work that you did?
I did not have to pay the advance back, but no, I didn't own anything. That was a concept that they brought to me. It was strictly work for hire. It would have had my name on it.
Yeah.
And
but all that time and energy and yeah, wow. And so then you had turned down another potential job because you were working on that. Yeah, that was shaping up to be a pretty grim summer, but it turned around because a video game producer that I had worked with before called me up, and he said, "Hey, there's this development studio in Wrocław, Poland, who needs a writer. Are you available?" And I was like, well, as it turns out, I sure am.
I sure am. And he was telling me that there was the office was in Vancouver, and I'd gone to Vancouver on work trips before. Love Vancouver. Would love to move there, but Canada's rightfully picky about who they let in. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, that's because he said, there's going to be a significant on-site detail for this job. Like I would need to be there in the studio. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I love Vancouver. And he was like, no, it's in Poland. So I wound up living in Poland for 3 months while I was working on this video game. It was called Dying Light.
That's cool.
And I was supposed to just write the side quests for it. And the longer I was there, the more deeply I got involved. And I wound up rewriting like the entire main story for the game.
That's really neat. I'll scare a quote thing here. Probably a blessing it didn't have your name on it. Doesn't sound like they had their shit together much. Yeah, no, it doesn't. And a lot of them don't. I mean, even ones that are fairly well established often don't seem to have their shit together very often. I'm curious about if you were going to compare, say, writing a novel or writing even maybe one of these children's kind of stories to writing for a video game script, what do you really find the differences or the similarities?
The closest you get with a video game script, there are chunks of it that are like writing a screenplay. What they call the cut scenes, the little bit where the gameplay stops and you just see like a scene play out. That's a cut scene, and because I guess it cuts away from the action. And those are written essentially like screenplays. Okay. You have to get really, really, really specific. It's a lot like writing for animation. Like there's no room to let an actor, interpret what they're going to do. You have to tell the artists and animators, we need this character to do this in this way at this time. But writing for video games can also get weird. One phenomenon in video games is what they call ambient dialogue. It's also called barks. And that is little, like, single lines of dialogue that NPCs, non-player characters in the game world, say. And that's for two reasons. One is to make the world seem more alive, and the other is to give the player information. So if you're like I worked on a game called Mafia 3. I wrote all the barks for one of the factions in that game. It was supposed to be the Redneck Mafia. And so there's tailor-made for Georgia boys.
I was going to say, did they seek you out?
And like, for instance, in the game, there was one bad guy that used a shotgun. He was known around the office as the shotgunner. And when he was firing, there was a period of time when he had to reload, and that was your chance as the player to pop up out of cover and shoot him if you could. So the shotgunner had to say something like, "I'm out of shells." The thing is that you hear those kinds of lines over and over and over and over, hundreds, sometimes thousands of times over the course of playing a game. If it's the same dialogue over and over, it sounds terrible. It becomes annoying. And so what you have to do is write like 20 or 30 different ways for the character to say, "I'm out of shells." "I'm out of shells. I'm out of ammo. Need some ammo. I'm empty here. Who's got some shells? Throw me some ammo." And literally, a lot of the time, you were writing in an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, wow. That's
interesting.
I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'd like want to do that, because to a degree it sounds boring.
It makes your brain pour out your ooze. Yeah. No one in comics, no one in video games likes writing barks, but it's necessary.
Right. Yeah.
And it turned out I'm pretty good at that too. So I wrote I did a game called Prototype 2, wrote all the barks for that. Several Transformers games I did back in like 2010, 11, 12. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of variations because each character has their own personality. So there's going to be a slightly different way that they say, "I'm out of shells."
Yeah.
Or, missile incoming, missiles on the way, watch out for the missiles. And it can get daunting because sometimes the game designers will want you to convey information that's very detailed. And you've got maybe 8 syllables to do it. So, if they want the bad guy to indicate, "We're looking for the player and he was here earlier, but he's not here now." Do that in 8 syllables, 30 or 40 times.
Oh my gosh.
For 15 or 20 different characters. Sometimes you have to take a break and go look at nature.
Yeah. If
you're working on that.
Lose my mind. But I guess, it's still pay. I mean, ultimately, like, it does pay. And I wouldn't say it pays the bills. You might still need to do other things, but I guess you do have to fill in like kind of like the gaps with things like that. But that's interesting. So how do you fall into doing something like that?
Fall into it is the right term. I was at Dragon Con and I had done a panel on comic books. And when I went back to my table, one of the guys that I recognized from the audience came to my table and was talking to me. And I asked him what he did for a living. And he said, I run the content department at an MMO that's just starting up. That's massively multiplayer online MMORPG. That's like World of Warcraft.
Right, yeah.
And I said, "Oh, that's really awesome. I've often thought that getting into video game writing would be a really good thing to do." And he said, "Well, I could set up a job interview if you'd like."
Nice.
Really?
Yeah.
So yeah, I wound up moving to North Carolina and lived there for 2.5 years and worked on this video game. And while I was there, ran into a guy on Facebook who was an agent for video game writers, and he got me my first freelance video game writing thing. There was a pretty well known Transformers game called War for Cybertron, and they had a script, like it was written, but for whatever reason they had decided that it wasn't working. They wanted to move in a different direction or change the tone or something. And so they said, yeah, rewrite all this. So I did. And that's cutscenes and barks and everything, every word. I mean, sometimes some of the lines that were there already were okay. So I, maybe 5% of the time, I just left them there. But yeah, almost all of the words came across my keyboard.
Wow. I mean, that's really fascinating. It's interesting because I guess, we tend to think of writing in books, but or TV, but you kind of forget that somebody is writing out things for video games. They're writing out what the characters say or how that's going to come across. So that's really fascinating that you kind of did fall into that and it worked. And that's something you still do to this day, correct?
Yeah. In fact, I have a conference call on Monday of next week with the guy that I'll be reporting to for a new video game job that I don't think I can say anything about yet.
Fair enough.
I'll be very excited to talk about it when I can, because it's a very well-known property.
Nice. That's exciting. Yeah, well, that's good to know you, right? Rub them elbows. So let's go back to the beginning, like when you decided I want to be a writer and you're 19. Is the book that's up there, is that the first book you wrote?
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah.
No, I fell into that too.
Okay.
I'd grown up reading comic books, and I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I had been writing short stories. And I visited my older sister. She was living in Macon, Georgia, and I went down and was visiting her. And during that visit, I went out to the mall and was playing some video games in the arcade.
I love it.
That's how long ago this was.
I love it.
Back before I had gray in my beard. And the arcade attendant was this really cute girl. And I wound up asking her out. So on our first date, she asked me if I had ever considered writing comic books. And I said, well, I read comic books. I never thought about writing them. And she said, well, I know a couple of professional comic book artists I could introduce you. So she did. And that was Craig Hamilton and Tony Harris. And they made introductions to editors. And they, like, you can have people open a door for you, like get your foot in, but then you gotta be the one to push your way through the door and go all the way through. And so the editors, after talking with me, decided that I was okay, and I started getting work.
That's right. At 19?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
A little mind blowing. Honestly, that's awesome.
I paid for a portion of college with comic book proceeds.
Yeah.
It was. Oh, hang on just a second.
Sure. Well, while Dan's chit-chatting for a second.
No, I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a pretty bleak summer. I've had my share of bleak summers. It was a pretty bleak summer where I didn't have any money, and I was stuck in Athens, Georgia, working at a telemarketing company.
Ooh, no.
And at the time was painfully single, and all my friends had gone back home, and I didn't buy groceries for like 6 weeks. I just scavenged the stuff that my roommates had left in the cabinets in the kitchen, and I didn't have enough money to pay fall tuition. So I was lying there on my bed feeling pitiful and hungry. And, I was like, I'm going to have to move back home and go to work in a carpet mill.
Ooh, yeah.
And the phone rang, and it was one of the editors that I first talked to. and he offered me. There was an Aliens, like the Sigourney Weaver Aliens.
Yeah.
There was an Aliens miniseries that had problems, and the creative team got fired, and it was supposed to be 12 issues. And so he called me up and said, "Hey, there's 2 issues. We can run this through issue 10. Can you wrap this up in 2 issues?" And I was like, yes, I can. Yeah. And I said, okay. I got caught up to speed and was ready to start. And I said, do you have a preference? How do you want this to end? And he was so sick of the project. He was like, just blow them all up. just kill them all. So that's what happened.
That's awesome.
And I was able to stay in college.
Were you going to school for writing? What were you going to school for?
Well, I sort of did the path of least resistance with my education. I only applied to the University of Georgia because I was pretty sure they'd take me. I applied to the English program because I was pretty sure I'd get in. So I have a degree in English for all the good it does. You know, no one cares if you have a degree. No one is. I've been writing for 34 years. Not once have they
asked for your degree.
Any job ever asked me what my degree was in, like, or if I have one or not. It doesn't. I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm not saying don't get a degree. You can learn a lot of good stuff. You can have a lot of great life experiences. Knowledge is great. But anybody who thinks that they can get work as a writer because they have a degree in writing.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
agreed. I expressed that opinion. I was on a panel at NC State. It was me and it was me and 3 writers who had all only ever been published in academic journals. And we were talking to a group of creative writing students. And the question was, how important is it to get a degree? And I told them, I was the first one to answer, and I gave them my honest opinion. And the hate glares that I got from the other writers on that. They didn't invite me back.
Oops. I don't think it's really impacted your life all that much. So, I think.
Nah.
Yeah. But I think that's valid. I think that's really important for people to hear because, I went to school for journalism and decided that I didn't want to be a journalist. I love the research aspect of being, journalism. I don't like the reporting aspect of it, like having to be neutral and whatever. So I've taken the things I liked about it and weaved it into my writing. But I can't say that going to school for that necessarily made me a better writer. It probably made me a better researcher because I definitely really dig in now. But I think there is this element of being a writer that 1 comes naturally, and 2, that you're willing to always learn no matter where that learning comes from. Panels, I learned so much from listening to panels, like going to cons and either being on them or just sitting in on them and just listening to people talk about that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and cons are great places to network too. I'm a huge introvert. I don't like people, but you can go to cons and you're there with your people.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference. You can find people who actually see the world the way you do.
Yeah, I'm a huge introvert too, and that's I think why I like panels because it's kind of like something where it's led, someone's helping you decide what you're going to say. And so I really enjoy being on panels for that reason, because I am an introvert. And I always joke that like when I first would have to sign at events, people would walk up and they'd be like, "Oh, are these your books?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And that would be the extent of the conversation. I was like, why am I not making sales?
Well, I joke with my wife that I am able to go to cons and talk to people all day, every day. Because all of the nerve endings have just been worn off.
you're overstimulated to the point that you're no longer stimulated. So you're just able to like, yeah. For me, it was practicing scripts. Like, okay, I got to practice these scripts. Like, I used to be an actress back in the day. I did a lot of acting. And so what I learned in my real life is it's all a stage, right? So like, I just created scripts and that's what I do. And I do great with that. And even this, what I found for this show was originally I had a lot of questions I'd ask and I didn't like it. I was like, I don't feel like it's natural. So now I'm like, I'm just going to wing it every time. Worst case scenario, we're going to like hum some songs until the time is up, So far, we haven't had to do that, so I think we're doing all right. Yeah. But we are getting close. So just real quick, a couple of things I wanted to just touch on. What was the first thing you published? And what is the most current thing you published?
The first thing, so I wrote an issue of Vampirella, the comic book series Vampirella. But it didn't come out when it was supposed to. It was like 9 or 10 months late. And in that intervening time, I got another Aliens story through Dark Horse, which actually did come out. So it's either Vampirella or Aliens, way back at the beginning.
Cool.
Most currently, the ones that you can get right now. So on the screen there, the Runemaster Homicide, that's the first book in my new fantasy series.
Ooh, okay.
And it's a fantasy mystery series because I was going to write a sequel to The Storm and then COVID hit and I lost my taste for the real world. Yeah. But I really liked writing mysteries. And so I created a new world and now I'm writing mysteries in that. So quick pitch for the series is called the Demon Sleuth Scrolls. And it's an original setting. There's an all-human empire that's been using rune-based magic to solve crimes for the last 300 years. Something begins to break that magic down. And so it falls to the first ever non-human member of the Imperial Criminal Investigation Ministry to begin introducing actual detective procedures for the first time in like 12 generations. She and all her people are refugees. A natural disaster drove them out of their homeland. They had to take shelter in the human realm. They are all tall, gorgeous, fast, strong, smart. They have violet skin, yellow eyes, and horns. The humans call them demons. They're not demons. But the main character is another female main character. Niska Stonegate is her name. And she has no choice but to join one of the investigative units in the ministry and become a reluctant investigator and an even more reluctant ambassador for her people.
That's cool. So is this out now?
Yeah. The first 3 books are out now, and I'm working on the 4th.
Very cool. I'll check that out. That sounds really intriguing. Very, very unique. Okay. And then real quick, here. So tell us a little bit about where people can find your books and any events you might have coming up.
You can go to my website. That's www.danjolley.com. And everything I've ever done is on there. I might need to update it a little bit, but all the stuff is available on Amazon. Oh, you know what? It's been staring me in the face this whole time. As far as novels go, the Demon Sleuth Scrolls is the most recent. I also have a new graphic novel series.
Mac Moon and
the Pets.
Okay.
It's about a kid who discovers that his dog, cat, and fish are actually alien law enforcement agents on Earth. And they have to defend the planet from an evil space ferret. That's
super cool. Okay, I haven't get a copy of that for my grandson. That's super awesome. Very good. And do you have any events that you have upcoming this year?
Let's see. I'm going to be at Dragon Con and Balticon.
Where is
I'll
that?
be going to Balticon for Baltimore for the first time. And also for the first time, I've been accepted as a guest at Congregate in Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
Never been there either.
I haven't either, but I always look at it every year. I didn't even apply this year because I think it coincided with something else I was doing, but it's always one that intrigues me because it's a little bit different. So that's really cool. Yeah. So you're a guest of honor at Congregate. And when
I'm
is
a
Congregate?
guest. There's
You're a guest?
usually there's only one guest of honor for
Okay.
whatever categories, but yeah, I'll be there. I'll be selling books, the table, and talk to
when is
people.
Is it July?
Let's see.
Like I'm trying to remember because I have somebody on my calendar, but
Balticon is first. That's May 23rd through 26th.
okay.
And then Congregate is July 11th through 13th.
Okay.
And DragonCon is August 28th through September 1st.
Okay, very cool. So y'all check Dan out. I can definitely recommend his work. Like I said, I got the book The Storm, but I've checked out your other stuff too. We have children that come in and specifically ask for you by name. So that's really cool at the library too.
Really?
Yeah. That's actually how I knew that you wrote children's stuff, is because I knew that you were friends and I knew you'd written The Storm and I knew you wrote some adult novels. And I had a family come in and they were like, we're looking for, and it was either The Warriors or The Twisted. I can't remember now which one it was. Or they're like, by Dan Jolley. And that's when I was like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And I was like, wait, Dan Jolley, like the adult fiction writer? And then that's when I realized how broad your skill set was. So yeah, that was kind of really cool.
Yeah, I asked the editors at HarperCollins if they were okay with me doing this kids series when I also write books that are patently rated R. And they were like, no, it's fine. I
just want to give you that little bump here. Rune Master Homicide is pretty great from Zach. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, they said that the audiences were so widely separated that it's not even really anything to worry about. The only difficulty would be is if I decided to start writing erotica.
Yeah. So is that a plan? Yeah.
That's not in the plans.
Not currently.
I have, in fact, Mac Moon is I'm going to show it again. Mac Moon is this is the first ever thing that I've written that is deliberately a comedy. Like the whole thing is funny.
That's cool.
Start to finish. I didn't think I could be funny, but once again, no one was more surprised than I was. Turns out I can be funny.
Oh, awesome,
So yeah, I have a whole comedy novel series in the works.
Very cool. Very cool. You're so always working on something, huh? So yeah. Well,
yeah. I read somewhere that somebody said being a writer is like having homework every night until you die.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, it is like that.
It's true. Yes. You're like getting up early to do it. Because me in high school, I was a procrastinator and I waited until the next morning. I still do that. I get up really early, try to knock it out before work. So I totally get that.
And I'm up all night. Like night owl, sleep late. I think I'm at my peak productivity from midnight to 3 a.m.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, it's been great chatting with you. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And again, this will be available to watch after tonight's live stream. It'll be available to watch on YouTube. So please do check it out and give us some thumbs up, give us some love, and definitely check out Dan. Again, I can vouch for his writing. It's pretty amazing. And we really appreciate you giving us the time to chat with you and tell us more about kind of what you do. And I hope to see you at some event at some point again. So I'm sure we'll cross paths. But thank you, everybody. And just remember, it's always time for Go Indie Now.